The Honourable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, members of Cabinet of Barbados and visiting ministers, His Honour Sir Richard Cheltenham, President of the Senate of Barbados, His Honour Mr. Arthur E. Holder, Speaker of the House of Assembly of Barbados, presiding officers of parliaments and parliamentarians from across the region, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Her Excellency Dame Billy Miller, members of the head table, National Gender Machinery representatives, other distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the Transformational Leadership for Gender Equality in the Caribbean Regional Strategies and Partnerships Dialogue. It's our pleasure to have you with us this morning. As we open this opening ceremony, I ask us to reflect on the words of the Barbados National Anthem and the proud guardians of this wonderful land in the Caribbean that we have. This is what we're hoping to discuss today. And so without further ado, I would like to invite the representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office for the Caribbean, Alison McLean, to make welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. So happy to be able to say that for the first time, Prime Minister. Such an honor. Members of the Cabinet of Barbados and visiting ministers, His Honor Sir Richard Cheltenham, President of the Senate of Barbados and Lady Cheltenham, His Honor Mr. Arthur E. Holder, Speaker of the House of Assembly of Barbados, Ambassador Her Excellency Dame Billy Miller, presiding officers of parliaments and parliamentarians from across the region, members of the Diplomatic Corps, my fellow head table, and other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and delighted on behalf of UN Women to offer a warm Caribbean welcome on behalf of this organization to all specially invited guests and participants. To this, the first of what we envisage will be a series of such, I was going to say meetings, but I prefer to say joining of forces. This is a time of paradox. It is a moment of great opportunity for progress, but also one of great danger. Today, the world, in general, accepts many of the basic tenets and concepts which those brave and militant women of Beijing had to struggle and insist on. Following recent elections in the region, women's representation in legislatures has increased significantly, approaching or surpassing parity in some chambers. The election of the Honourable Mia Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, has drawn further attention to women's central leadership role in the sphere of political decision-making. On the other hand, we cannot say that the battle has been won. The pushback, the backlash, and in many cases, the shrinking space in which we claim and advocate for gender equality and empowerment of women means that we must keep focused and have nerves of steel. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and goals consolidate and affirm that we must harness all talent, all resources, and all knowledge if we're going to reach our anticipated final destination. Without the leadership and voice of women at the forefront of implementation efforts, in the absence of gender-responsive budgets, plans, and programs, if we fail to tackle and address discriminatory laws, practices, and power relations, and if we do not make needed social services available, accessible, and affordable, then we would have failed not only the ancestors, but those who are yet to come. The agenda for women must be seen and it must be heard. And this agenda must not be about or for the few, but for the many. This agenda is not a shopping list of demands which we think can shape the future of women. Absolutely not. It is much more than that. And that is why we are here this morning, to begin what we hope will be an honest, energetic, and comprehensive conversation about how we change, challenge, and counter the ecosystem of inequality, insecurity, exclusion, and injustice that inure against human rights, freedom, and democracy. This convening of parliamentarians and ministers from the Anglophone Caribbean with government, civil society reps, and other relevant stakeholders specializing in women's rights and gender equality is about positioning, programming, and partnering in order to advance action and thinking behind how to harness the transformative potential of the 2030 agenda. We want to create synergies, leverage integration. We want to talk about accountability, gender-responsive processes and institutions, and we want to address intersecting inequalities so that we leave no one behind. I look forward to vigorous debate, productive exchange, and workable and meaningful outcomes. Thank you and welcome again.
Very much, Alison. And with those words from my Commander-in-Chief, I would like to introduce myself. I am Tom Broadba. I am the Deputy Representative of UN Women, and I will be guiding you through the ship of this opening ceremony. I would like to really thank Alison for those remarks and note that gender responsiveness, which is what Alison spoke about, is about effectiveness. As she said, we in the Caribbean and in the world are in a precarious moment. And if we are not effective and efficient with the way in which we guard the heritage of our faith, the loyal sons and daughters also making sure that the hills and seas beyond recall leave no one behind when we're making them our very own. So it is with this in mind that the Commonwealth Secretariat, Parliamericas, UN Women, and CARICOM came together with the SDGs in mind, the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 17. We are living a global partnership to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And we would not be able to do that without the leadership of Caribbean organizations like the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership. So I would like to invite Lady Anande Trotman-Joseph, the chair of the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership Board of Directors, to give the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Indeed, it is my honor and privilege to say good morning, firstly to Honorable Mia Moore-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, members of the Cabinet of Barbados, and visiting ministers, I believe from Canada, and of course, His Honor Sir Richard Cheltenham, President of the Senate of Barbados, and Lady Cheltenham, His Honor Mr. Arthur E. Holder, Speaker of the House of Assembly of Barbados, Her Excellency Ambassador Dame Billy Miller, also patron of CIWIL, one of those ladies who have been guiding us throughout the course of the life of CIWIL. Presiding officers of parliaments, parliamentarians from across the Caribbean region, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the head table who share this agenda with us all today, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, sisters and brothers. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
I am here this morning with the pleasurable task of sharing some remarks on behalf of CIWIL, the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership. And for us this morning is indeed as delightful as it is empowering. When, as a young lawyer and advocate for gender equality, I did begin my regional work with many of you who are here this morning, indeed, gender, the conversation and dialogue about gender and a gender agenda would have seen mainly and sometimes only female faces. So today, I, on behalf of CIWIL, and I speak for us, we stand on the shoulders and the sacrifices, the blood and tears of the women who empowered this dialogue on gender equality, because we saw that speaking to ourselves would have been speaking to the converted. So indeed, we are heartened that not only are you here with us, sisters, but brothers, you have joined this dialogue. Let me firstly express the gratitude of all of us here, really, to the global governments and peoples who have made this event possible. Indeed, this is a multi-stakeholder effort, mainly of Parliamericas, and we salute your efforts for getting us together and really being the key sponsor and motivator towards having this event today. The UN Women, always there supporting us, even with changing faces, yet some remain the same. The Commonwealth Secretariat and their representative, Tress Ann, and Tress as we belovedly call her, is here. And of course, we would not be here without the hospitality and great welcome of the government and people of Barbados. And indeed, this topic is so important to the leadership of Barbados that Prime Minister Motley herself has found time in her very, very, very busy schedule and many challenges that she faces as incoming Prime Minister to be with us today. Because as we dialogue about a gender equality agenda for the Caribbean, for Barbados and for all of our nations, and for our contributions to the geopolitics of our globe, indeed, we must do so in the context of our collective awareness, consciousness, and experiences. I urge us as we go through the next 2 days not to forget why we are here at all and what it is exactly that we must build upon in very transformational ways. Theoretically, our regional governments have ratified and acceded to practically all of the universal treaties on human rights. So we know that the legislative framework for our protections of these rights are all there in black and white. Again, in 2014, I was part of the movements that saw the Caribbean unanimously embracing the Sustainable Development Goals, and I, through the UN Women, represented Caribbean women in Samoa as we embraced and advocated for that transformational pathway to sustainability. More recently, as we contemplate all of these gains and what we have embraced, we see ourselves moving now to frameworks that confront corruption in our societies. And I have been privileged, as through my work in gender equality, to have understood and embraced that the pinnacle of such work to empower and protect our vulnerable groups, even as some of us, for example, women, mainstream into public life, continue to break glass ceilings and really take our places, including in spaces and positions of power, as evidenced this morning by our Prime Minister Motley. And I say our, because I remember the last time we had such a meeting like this, really chaired and hosted by another female Prime Minister in Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, who is now Leader of Opposition in Trinidad. Our Prime Minister, Mayor Motley, was there with us in CIWIL and with us as part of that consortium of meeting to really implement a gender agenda of equality and achievement in our region. But back to anti-corruption and where this is taking us, all of our work must take us to that place of not only protection of our vulnerable groups, but protection of our resources. Because indeed, if we do not acknowledge this and manage our resources in a very sustainable way, in a way that really realizes our economic empowerment, well, then this would be conducive to corruption. So my work and the work of Civil has taken me to leading not only the regional initiatives on anti-corruption by helping and joining with others from Grenada throughout the Commonwealth Caribbean to form a Commonwealth Caribbean Association of Integrity Commissions and anti-corruption bodies, but I currently chair the Integrity Commission in Grenada. And I say all of this to say that I really believe that I've embraced this transformational responsibility because of all that you have encouraged me collectively as a Caribbean grouping looking towards gender equality and its true realization. As we focus again throughout this, or rather these 2 days, let us remember the context of our agenda and what transformational will really mean. Our discussions on equality should also include the context of accessibilities to education, holistic health services, including the rights to reproductive health, access to justice, protections for women and their children, and also protections for men where they too are discriminated. Let us remember to engage with and negotiate healthy relationships between us, men and women, boys and girls, will help us to attain and realize our sustainable development. Implementation will be key because we can gather here and talk and talk and talk like spit presses and spit shops, but really implementation now is key. I joined this gender equality movement when I became an attorney in 1987. So for me, I am now anxious, like I'm sure some of my sisters are, to see the realization of the implementation of all that talk. So I underscore for us the importance of our continued and transformed commitment and determination. I encourage to leadership, and as many of us prepare to pass on the batons through Civil, through our different mechanisms, let us not only speak of sustainability in terms of our development, but also sustainability in our leadership on these gender issues. Our dialogue must indeed recognize that some of the gains that we feel that we may have gained through our agitations and struggles for independence and nationhood may now be in danger of being faced with some regressive agendas and stances. But together, over these next 2 days, let us reimagine a Caribbean where we all, male and female, will live in equality, guided by respect and tolerance, working side by side. May we be the leaders who inspire others to believe that we together can realize sustainability in our daily lives, in our private spheres, and in our public spheres. Together, let us embrace sustainable equality so that we can implement a peace and prosperity that will make our One Caribbean a space within the global village that is an inspiration to all. I thank you.
Many thanks, Lady Anande, for those inspirational remarks and the remarks that remind us this is not the beginning. We have been on a long road towards this work, In mentioning the Beijing Platform for Action, I see persons here who were at Beijing, Caribbean women leading the way to ensure that, yes, as the Jamaicans say, we may be little, but we're very talawa, right? So to add a bit of levity to the space, there was a fantastic movie that came out earlier this year called Black Panther. And in it was this magical world called Wakanda. And I remember watching it and saying, but I feel that Barbados is really almost, we could be that. Trinidad, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, all of us, we are the seeds of that. This is the transformational pathway to sustainability that Lady Anande was speaking about. And yes, there are many vulnerable groups in the Caribbean, and often women are considered parts of this group of vulnerable people. What we need to also start looking at is how can we look in the strengths in those vulnerabilities, certain things that we see as weaknesses, how can we transform them into our strengths, our size, our people? These are where our strengths lie. And when we stand on the shoulders of women, I see a woman in here telling me to smile because she is my mother. But there are also amazing, amazing women in this room that speak to what Maya Angelou said. We should not be falsely modest. We know where our strengths lie. The Caribbean is an amazing place, and the women and men in the Caribbean are amazing people. We need to understand humility, which is on whose shoulders do we stand? The women and the men. The men, like the Honorable Robert Nault, MP and President of Parliamericas, without whom we wouldn't be able to do this work. We need male allies in order to achieve gender equality. We cannot do it on our own. So, without further ado, I would like to ask the Honorable Robert Nault to give his welcoming remarks. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. My mother's not here, but when my wife's here, she always says the same thing. Be nice if you smiled once in a while. So thank you very much for allowing me to come today to say a few words. It's always a pleasure. But first I want to thank the Prime Minister directly for her taking the opportunity to speak to us today. It's always a great sign of the importance of a subject matter when the Prime Minister takes the time out to come and speak to us, so we should be very thankful of that. So Prime Minister, ministers, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished colleagues, my great friend Senator Ann Cools from Canada, who has made a special trip to come. She's originally from Barbados, and has told me many, many things about you, so all good, of course. So I wanted to say thank you to her, and of course, Sir Richard, who is almost relative now, related to me because his wife and my wife have become close friends on the internet, talking to each other daily about how things are down in the Caribbean versus how they are in Canada. So these kinds of events do more than just talk about issues. They grow relationships and partnerships, and we should not take that too lightly, because I think the world is all about getting to know each other. And so I bring up my new relationship with Sir Richard because of my wife. So I've told Colleen, his wife, to tell Sir Richard to be nice to me. And that's how it works, you see, because women have a lot to say, more than we might imagine. So I just wanted you to know that. It's a pleasure and an honor as a newly elected president of Parliamericas to be here with you in Barbados. I'd like to thank my colleague from the Parliamericas Board of Directors, Speaker Arthur Holder, who I befriended, and he befriended me, I think, in Victoria, when 13 speakers, many from the Caribbean, came to Canada at our meetings where I was elected president, and we got to know each other very well. And so now, since I've been hosting him, he has to look after me while I'm here in Barbados. And so I want to thank Arthur for the nice job he's going to do on Tuesday night, whatever that may be. And I want to thank him for the support that has been provided by the Parliament of Barbados for this activity. and to extend our appreciation, as I said, to Prime Minister Motley for joining us at this morning's inauguration. I look forward to your remarks, which are certain to inspire us as we work through the important agenda that we all have here. I'd also like to acknowledge UN Women for the collaboration, as well as the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership. I'd like to thank the Commonwealth Secretariat and CARICOM. These partners have contributed to making this meeting the success that I know it will be. And finally, I'd like to thank the Government of Canada through Global Affairs for their continued support for Parliamericas, which allows us to work in these very important types of initiatives. And my government, of course, as you know, has been very active and involved in the areas of gender and gender equality, and I think this shows the support by the work that Global Affairs is doing with us at Parliamericas. Since joining the Board of Directors of Parliamericas in 2016, and I should tell you a little history. I started politics at a very young age in 1988 and stayed for 15 and a half years, and then decided that, which I always encourage colleagues to be careful of, I started to get tired of politics. And I had a 10-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son who I rarely saw because as a minister of the Crown, I was always somewhere. And so I decided to retire and left politics for 11 years. And once the kids grew up, I came back. And so I just started in 2015, all refreshed and raring to go. So 2016 was an opportunity to join Parliamericas and to be involved more in the world affairs versus domestic affairs, as I did as a Minister of the Crown in my first mandate. And so 2016 was a good year because I got involved in Parliamericas and got to know all of you and many of you in the room through meetings as the chair of Parliamericas of the Canadian section. So this meeting is a next step in a series of gender equality initiatives that Parliamerica has been advancing with our partners. As the chair, as I said, of the Canadian section of Parliamericas, I was happy to help host the Canadian Caribbean Parliamentary Exchange on Multi-Party Caucuses for Gender Equality, held in Ottawa in October 2016. This was one of my first opportunities to engage in discussions with colleagues from the Caribbean on some of the themes we're building on here today. I learned a great deal from those exchanges. We talked about the importance of partnerships and building connections with diverse stakeholders. That meeting helped build a foundation for much of our subsequent work, including exciting new initiatives that Parliamericas will be launching in the coming year. These meetings allow us to meet in person to discuss gender equality and women's leadership. And as politicians, we get the opportunity to engage in conversations with civil society, representatives from regional organizations, and members of the public service who have dedicated themselves to this very important work. These discussions are critical in advancing this shared agenda. I am extremely proud as well of the Canadian government and our Prime Minister for having made gender equality a central priority. It seems such simple words as making gender equality an important initiative, but when most of us in the room, I would suspect, have daughters. If you don't, you're unlucky. Because I have a 25, oh, she'd hate this because her birthday's next week. She's 25 years old, and I've learned one thing from Samantha, is that gender equality is the most important thing to success. And that is, you can give everyone all the education you want, but if they don't get equal opportunity, they just don't succeed. And so those simple words, but important central priority of the Government of Canada shows that we believe not only is it a human right, but it's also a very important procedure we have to follow as Canadians and as citizens so that men, boys, girls, and women all are treated equally. In Canada, this is having a very important impact on how we prioritize policy discussions and resource allocation. This year, our government introduced its first gender-based federal budget. Gender-based analysis plus has ensured that we as a country are targeting our resources more effectively. As you well know, It has also impacted how we as a country conduct our foreign policy and development assistance. We launched Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, which recognizes that the empowerment of women and girls is central to positive change. It's very clear to me and others that in order to be successful, men and women must work together to build the inclusive society that we strive for. We need to defend the equal rights of women as human rights. The inequality of women and girls hurts all of us, men and boys included. One of the reasons why I wanted to make sure I attended this meeting in particular is because I believe that gender equality is a central issue of concern to both women and men. Men need to be allies to break down these historic barriers and make sure that all people, women, girls, men, and boys, have equal opportunity to livelihood and success, and that all people can live in a world without fear or discrimination and violence. I believe that men in politics can do more to work alongside women colleagues who have been the forceful voices for change to push this important agenda forward. So I'm here to learn from the rich experience and wisdom in this room and to add my voice and my actions to forwarding this very important agenda. So to all of you who have made the effort to be here, I want to thank you very, very much. We have to keep working hard, and actions speak louder than words, and I think we'll get where we want to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those words of partnership and collaboration and demonstrating that it's not just about male allies, it's about partnership. It's really about partnership. I have been thinking a lot about asking what your country can do for you when we work with parliamentarians, because generally they're asking you what you can do for the country. And also, of course, what the country needs to do for, the people in the country need to do for their country. But especially in Barbados right now, it's going to be an interesting thing to see what the people of Barbados and the representatives of Barbados are going to be able to do to support the country's sustainable development achievements. So it is with honor and pride that I invite another fantastic, I'm going to say partner in gender equality rather than ally, His Honor Arthur E. Holder, the Speaker of the House of Assembly of Barbados and member of the Parliamerica's Board of Directors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Honorable Mayor Amor Mortley, Prime Minister, members of Cabinet and other visiting ministers, President of the Senate, Sir Richard Cheltenham, the Honorable Dame Billy Miller, Ambassador Extraordinaire and Plenipotentiary, Senators, Head Table, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of respective parliaments, senators, delegates from civil society, members of the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. And welcome you to this island paradise, the gem of the Caribbean. I extend sincere gratitude on behalf of Parliamerica's Board of Directors to the distinguished inauguration speakers and to the delegates and partner organizations we will have the pleasure of working with over the next 2 days. We are most appreciative of the time each and every one of you have taken out of your busy schedule to be here, to offer and share your expertise and vast experience so that we may together build stronger and more strategic plans for gender equality in the region. I wish to share with you a very brief synopsis of Parliamerica's and its Gender Equality Network. Parliamerica's is the institution that promotes parliamentary diplomacy in the inter-American system. Its membership is composed of 35 national legislatures from North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean. The Parliament of Barbados is proud to be a member of the Board of Directors of Part of Americas. It was elected this past September at the 15th Plenary Assembly in Victoria, Canada. The Parliament of Barbados is most pleased to support this meeting, which brings together many of our neighbors from the hemisphere. It is an opportunity to exchange parliamentary actions and initiatives that can assist in the advancement of women's rights and political leadership for a future based on equality and prosperity for all. Gender equality is one of Parliament's 3 primary focus areas of work, the other 2 being open parliament and climate change. Parliament's work on each theme is led by a parliamentary network, and the executive committees of these networks, as well as Parliament's Board of Directors, have balanced representation from across the hemisphere. The meeting here is very timely as we are approaching a critical time for taking stock and evaluating the progress of our country towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. In order to succeed in the 2030 Development Agenda, we must make women's rights and leadership a mainstream priority. This is both an essential objective in its own right and a key aspect of the solutions we must shape to foster long-term progress across all areas of development. As an institution that convenes parliamentarians with diverse stakeholders, Parliamentarians has played an important role in processes to ensure that gender equality and development go hand in hand, promoting the integration of legislative perspectives and sharing our good practices for the benefit of other parliaments. Our work is based on the principles of participation and inclusivity, involving co-creation, consultation, and collaboration across different sectors and across political lines and borders. This meeting being convened here over the next 2 days is about exactly that coming together for stronger coordination and the exchange of new ideas. At the heart of this meeting, therefore, is partnerships and knowledge sharing, exemplifying Parliament's core values and working methods. Under the banner, Transformational Leadership for Gender Equality in the Caribbean, we will jointly contribute to the development of regional strategies and action plans. Over the next 2 days, we will learn about the work currently underway in our region to support women's leadership and gender equality. Important projects are being led by multilateral organizations, our parliaments, and local civil society organizations, and their outcomes and findings can inform national and international decision-making. I wish to lastly recognize the important contributions of the partners that helped make this meeting possible. Among them, UN Women Multi-Country for the Caribbean, Caribbean Institute for Women in the Leadership, the Commonwealth Secretariat, Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada, and the Government and Parliament of Barbados. Finally, I wish you all success in your respective sessions as you meet to strengthen collaborative discourse in advancing gender equality. I thank you.
Very much for those remarks, Speaker Holder. We were speaking about the shoulders on whom we stand. And there are many women in this room. If I called out all of your names, I see you, we know what you have done for us to be able to be here today, for many of the senators and the members of parliament to be here today. And we appreciate all that you do. Many of you are board members of CWIL. And we want to say thank you for your continued work to support women's political leadership in the Caribbean. As Speaker Holder just said, women's leadership and women's rights are critical to sustainable development. But not just because it is a human right outlined in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, but also because it is economically, the best and most strategic thing to do. I've recently been reading Becoming by Michelle Obama, and one thing stood out to me. What a fantastic role model. And also knowing that we have fantastic role models in the Caribbean, like the Prime Minister of Barbados. That young girls and young boys are going to school knowing that a woman is in leadership not only because she's a woman, but because she was selected by the people as the right person for the job, the most qualified person for the job. So it is with great pride and honor that I invite the Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, to give the feature address.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those very kind words. I've always felt that you are in the wrong place. And I say so because I know what it is as a political leader to ask women to come and run. And I know how difficult it is for that exercise to be successful. And if this morning does nothing else, I hope it will cause you to reflect on where you need to be. Distinguished guests all, because each of you really are. I'm here this morning in the midst of everything else that's swirling because sometimes it is important to pause and to bring things back down to reality and to contextualize what really we are doing. And people sometimes can get jaded by phrases or words that you use so much that you forget what they really mean. And that applies to sustainable development. It captures so much, but it says so little to people who are not part of the club. And we have, therefore, to pause and really ask ourselves, what is this about? We live in interesting times. And we know that more than anything else, that the natural belief that life and history moves in a straight line cannot anymore be an accepted wisdom. And that in truth and in fact, we may find ourselves fighting for things that Dembele, you and Senator Cools in the vanguard of the fight, or shall I say even, dare say, as we celebrate the centenary of her birth, the first woman parliamentarian in Barbados, Dame Ermintrude, born this year being the centenary of her birth. Things that you all thought were long won and secured. And if I may reflect northwards again, as was done just now, except this time to the husband and not to the wife, if there is one lesson to be learned, is that gains that are secured ostensibly by one or two cannot be viewed as gains that are secured for all. And I have perhaps come here today to reflect with you and to share with you that the greatest task that lies ahead still is how do we ensure that what we see happening with the Me Too movement And what we see happening with persons like Rihanna daring to destroy accepted norms about what women should look like and what women should dress like and what women should be like. That those things have now to translate themselves to the basic aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the level of our communities. Because if we achieve that, we've effectively achieved a large measure of sustainable development. There can be no sustainable development that precludes the progress of women. There can be no sustainable development that is premised on discrimination. There can be no sustainable development that precludes opportunity. So that if we can set ourselves some simple targets that allow the battle to be fought not just by those in this room who happen to be associated with Parliamentarians or with UN Women or with the Commonwealth or CARICOM or CIWIL, but women in our communities who see themselves on the vanguard, in the vanguard of change, who recognize that, as has happened elsewhere and to which we hopefully will respond very shortly, that there are some fundamental things in our society that has to change. And part and parcel of the privilege that we exercise by being parliamentarians is that we have the power of choice. And it is our choice that will determine what their reality will be. I leave you today to go and do estimates. And estimates is fundamentally about choice. And choice will determine whether this government that I lead will spend money to create a single hybrid family law court that precludes the discrimination that exists now, where mothers of single mothers of children must go and stand up outside in a magistrate's court and wait their turn to be called in, as if you were taking an audit of stock that was not human, to be able to determine whether you will have access to funds or not. But that if you are married, you go and sit down in the air conditioner of the High Court and wait for a judge to talk to you in the privacy of chambers. It cannot be right, as we move to enter the third decade of the 21st century, that we perpetuate that kind of discrimination in our system. And when I say, therefore, that government is about choice, it is the choice that we will make to put on the front burner in the next financial year the establishment of a hybrid family law court that does not in any way perpetuate the worst aspects of our colonial system. There was a time, and Dame Billy, you told me, when women, as soon as they got married, or was it pregnant? Pregnant. Married. See what I told you? Had to resign from the public service. There, I can call a whole host of women who were nurses in this country, who upon marriage, 80 years ago, 70 years ago, 90 years ago, had to retire from the public service. So that seed of discrimination continued in the manner in which we sought to treat the arrangements for single women. And yet, majority of children in this country are born to single women. Similarly, how we treat to where we prioritize funding for parental education is a matter of choice. When I became a Minister of Education back in 1994, and Minister Ford would recall, we deliberately placed funds in the vote for parental education. I felt then, as I do perhaps even more strongly now, that at the core of building this nation is raising our people. And some may ask why I set some very simple goals for this government. that by 2030, every Barbadian child should be able to have been offered the opportunity to learn a second language. That every Barbadian child should be able to swim, because physical borders on an island should never cause you to believe that you are trapped. That every Barbadian child should be exposed to the artistic discipline and a sporting discipline. For even if they do not become proficient, they will master and understand the rudiments of it, but also understand an empathy and a capacity for teamwork that they don't get elsewhere. And finally, that every Barbadian child should be exposed to entrepreneurship, because fundamentally we must not be afraid of taking risks and building wealth. And why do I say that? Because perhaps instinctively, without necessarily having children of my own, I have nieces and nephews. And I know what I want for them. And in the same way that each and every one of us would want those things for our children, and I'm so glad, Robert, that you made that point, that if it is good enough for our own children, then it must be good enough for the children of the nation. Now, that's not going to happen by serendipity. It comes back down to choices. So that when we decide, for example, that we must pay for education, it is because we understand that education is the most liberating thing that we can give any human being. And that more often than not, women need to be educated even perhaps more, because we are not given the opportunities to be able to validate ourselves in circumstances without that platform of education as easily. And that is why the battle globally for girls' education, and that is why I'm proud when I see somebody like Rihanna at the front line of it, because we can't take for granted that which we have here, because it is a part of a global attitude that needs literally to be conquered against. So I ask us today, how do we transcend now to the communities? And I've been asking for a number of years, largely because within the context of political parties, it is difficult. You know it, I know it. I carry the scar as well, I suspect. And it is for that reason that we don't really talk about gender in the mainstream of a party. Because discussions about gender make people uncomfortable in a way that it shouldn't. Discussions about gender cause people to feel that you're trying to claim turf in a way that it shouldn't. Discussions about gender fundamentally ought to be about partnership. That's all it is. It's about partnership, and it's about opportunity, and it's about ridding ourselves of discriminatory practices wherever they find themselves. And if we can't master that conversation at 52 years old, as we will be next week, then we have serious problems. We have to master it in our context. I give you the age of Barbados, but whether it's Jamaica, whether it's Grenada, whether it's Dominica, whether it's Trinidad, whether it's Canada, we have to master it. And we have to master the difficult conversations give you the age of Barbados, but whether it's Jamaica, whether it's Grenada, whether it's Dominica, whether it's Trinidad, whether it's Canada, we have to master it. And we have to master the difficult conversations, because life has never been about black or white. More often than not, it's about gray. And it's about how we use the values that we have had instilled in us to make the judgments and decisions that will add value to the quality of the human experience. It doesn't become different because we are politicians or leaders. It's the same thought process. It's the same way we have to approach the choices that we need to make. And I want to urge us not to be frightened for the difficult conversations. Difficult conversations do not take away from who we are. In fact, it adds, because more often than not, it allows us to appreciate the perspective of the other side. We live in a world, regrettably today, where narrowcasting is the order of the day because of technological improvements. We get to listen to the things that we like to hear. So we listen to the channel on TV that speaks our language, literally. We go on the sites on the internet that reflect what we want to see or hear. And that narrowcasting, as opposed to broadcasting, means that we are at risk of cultivating and nurturing xenophobia and intolerance in a way that we've begun to see in other countries across the world. 100 years ago, people fought great battles against those things. That we should have to fight those battles in the 21st century will be the greatest travesty of our times, because we know better and we can do better. But it requires that we come out of the comfort of our familiar. It requires that we stretch beyond that which is comfortable. And it requires that we speak to people who don't like us, and we speak to people who don't want to talk to us, and we speak to people who don't look like us, and we speak to people who don't speak the same language. And it is only when we can do those things that we can lay the platform for better families, stronger communities, and better and stronger nations. I leave you today simply with the commitment that I have not come to be the first. I have come to make sure that I will not be the last. Thank you.